My name is Brownie Harris. I'm a professional photographer.
Exactly how you hear it is exactly how it all went down. It was later in the evening that the facts and the figures got turned around.
I've been shooting for almost 40 years. I started out in New York City when I was 22 years old. I graduated from VCU in Richmond in Communication Arts and Design and Photography. Went to New York City with $200. I was a taxi cab driver. I painted lofts in Tribeca when no one knew what Tribeca was. And I was a photo assistant for a couple months. Then I entered public broadcasting, WNET, Channel 13, PBS in New York City. When I was 22 years old, I created a photography department within WNET 13, Channel 13, PBS in New York City. I was Dick Cavett's photographer for 7 years and Bill Moyer's, did Dance in America, and started shooting for ABC, CBS, NBC, and MTV, and started shooting for national magazines, and then went on to shoot for Exxon Annual Report. I did Raytheon's Annual Report for 15 years and GE for 17 years. This is the Paul Taylor Dance Company, Twyla Tharp Dance Company. This portrait of Charlie Daniels was shot here in Wilmington. He's from Wilmington. His agent said I could do anything I want as long as I don't take his hat off. And this photograph was the CBS 60 Minutes team, and it was the New York Times Arts and Leisure. And I had to set this up. We lit the room to match the lighting outside. You have to remember it was filmed back then. I had to go get all of them in their offices and place them in position, tell them where to look and what to do with their hands. I love to photograph people because I think the challenge of a great portrait or environmental portrait of a person is to get the character and the spirit out of that person, and you both have to meet each other halfway. So I think, I do a lot of research about the person, whether they're well known or not, before I do the shoot. So I'm going into the shoot knowing at least something about them. And I think that relaxes them and know that you have interest in their lives. But versus, photographing a gas turbine, I don't think you really need to know the character and the spirit of that. But I think those clients want those type of photographs to come back like it looks like a jewel, because those situations are not that pleasant in real life. So with your lighting, you make it look spectacular. When I was in art school, they didn't teach you anything about lighting. So a friend of mine out in California, he was doing a lot of industrial stuff, and I got interested in it, and we started talking about lighting. And I started to buy a couple of Dynalite strobes, and I would go on these industrial shoots with one light and realize that you needed to light these situations in much more grander than just one light. And I just really taught myself lighting. I did not go to school or work with anybody to learn lighting.
I love that one, Sarah.
This is a photograph of Truman Capote that I shot in 1978. And a lot of people, when they look at this photograph, they think it's the actor that was in the movie Truman, but this is Truman Capote, the real one. One of my most memorable portrait sessions was with John F. Kennedy Jr., and it was 22 years ago, and it was for the cover of the voiceover of his father's book, Profiles in Courage, for the audio tape. And this was the first private studio portrait session since his father was in the White House. So here he was as a young kid, 27 years old, and it's really just a likeness of him. And I said, really not getting what I want here, Can you put your jacket on and put your hands up near your face? And I didn't realize until after he died that the significance of this photograph. 20 minutes after I took that other shot, he gave me this, and I think it really shows the true character and spirit of him, and actually almost like what he would look like in the future, because he looked like a little kid in the previous 20 minutes before. So I think that's a challenge when you're taking a portrait. Well, a week before his plane went down, at my wife's birthday party, some friends asked, that they wanted to see my photographs of Kennedy, John F. Kennedy Jr., and I showed it to them, didn't think anything of it, put the photographs on my desk, and that Friday, I put that portrait on my website because I really liked it, because I hadn't looked at it in 11 years. And that night, his plane went down. All of a sudden, I got a phone call from the people that were to do the portrait of the painting of Kennedy for the for the museum in Hyannis. So that portrait, those two portraits of mine and the painting are on permanent display there. And then years after that, this photograph was published on the cover of Forever Young, My Friendship with John F. Kennedy Jr. And then People magazine picked it up. And I think it's probably the strongest portrait I've ever done. And it was just one light. We were in a conference room, about 8 feet by 10 feet, had no room. It's only a 20-minute shoot. And I think that's probably the most significant portrait I've ever done. There's about 350,000 transparencies here. Look, Kodachrome. Remember Kodachrome? Oh my God, that was the best film. Sophia Loren, Giancarlo Giannini. There's Howard Da Silva. He was a famous character actor. This is Carol Kane. She was a famous actress. There's Sissy Spacek in Germany again. Oh my God, there's Jimmy Carter. Well, in 1976, I was shooting for Time, and this was the King Kong movie that was at the World Trade Center and that starred Jessica Lange. And there are about 3,000 people down here, and I was up on this truck, and I had a 20-millimeter lens, and I thought, why did I bring this lens? I turned it around for one frame and had the World Trade Centers lit at night. And I just found this print about a year ago, and I call it Fallen Giants. And I think it's significant because of what happened on 9/11. Another interesting portrait session was this photograph of Miles Davis. They were shot in Washington, D.C. in 1982. A French magazine flew me from New York to Washington to photograph him. So we got there about 9:30 in the morning, and I thought, well, this is going to be a quick shoot. Well, he didn't want to be photographed. He wanted to go downtown and buy a pair of shoes. So we went downtown, Washington, D.C., and we stood with the White House chauffeur for about 45 minutes. Finally, we got back to the hotel and took this portrait of him, and I really like it because you see the blister on his lips from the trumpet, and you see two of his lives, one on one part of his face and one on the other. And I think the shoot only lasted about 10-15 minutes, and then we flew back to New York. This is a photograph of Carly Simon. It was for the New York Times Arts and Leisure. It was back in the early 80s. She said that she wanted to play for me on her couch, and I went fine. And I was like really nervous because, you know, you're up against a gray wall, so I put a light behind the couch. I mean, it looks like it was shot in the studio, but it was shot in the living room. And she did this kiss shot. And that was the frame that I liked the best. And this is David Brinkley out near Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And he was I put him in the shade, and I had one light coming in from the right and matched the lighting to the background. A lot of people think that I shot that in a studio because it looks like old Western movies, you know, Technicolor movie. And this is from 35-millimeter Leica camera back in 1979. This is Twyla Tharp Dance Company in a performance rehearsal. I try to make my portrait sessions really simple because I think people that have never really been photographed before get really intimidated by all these lights. So I try to keep it simple with 1 or 2 lights. You know, I usually put it to one side, to the right side, because I think the reader looks that way from that side. But I try to keep it really simple because I think if you complicate it too much, you're just thinking about all that instead of connecting with that person and taking a great portrait. At one point, I was out of television, and so I was freelance at that point, which is very insecure. So I think no matter how successful you are, you're unemployed until the next job, and that's a very hard thing to get used to. And a lot of kids don't realize that. I think what's important for young people to start out in photography is to probably assist somebody that they admire first, because you'll learn more in 6 months than you will 4 years of art school. I'm not saying you shouldn't go to art school, but I think that's a good way to do it. And a lot of photographers now know nothing about business, and they don't teach that in art school, and I think that's important. You know, they think there's a formula for this. It's not a formula. I didn't even know what I was doing. I was so young. Don't put that in.